Okay, so today we're going to be building an indicator that will plot out fair value gaps on your chart. Okay, so first, what is a fair value gap? Well, go down here to this website here. It says FVG in trading means the fair value gap, which refers to the difference between the current value of an asset or currency and its fair value due to inefficiency or imbalance in the market. I like to look at fair value gaps as a place where price will come back and interact again. So for instance, if you look at this chart here, you can see that here we have a fair value gap that was created by these three candles. So the fair value gap is going to be the high of the previous candle and then the low of the candle after, and this will be your actual gap candle. And you can see we've created this fair value gap. Price went up, came back down, interacted with the fair value gap, and then went up again. And up here it created a second fair value gap. Price comes back down, interacts with it, looks like a couple times, and then again leaves, it comes back down to interact with it one more time, and then goes up again. So let's look at a couple more examples. And by the way, not all bearish fair value gaps will act as bearish fair value gaps. Sometimes you have bearish fair value gaps that act as bullish fair value gaps because price can be unpredictable. So here we have a bearish fair value gap. Price comes down, interacts with it, goes away from it, and then comes back up, interacts with it, and now it's really acting as sort of a buyer fair value gap because we come back down, we interact with it, and then it goes away again. So in general, they are a pretty good way to get an idea where price is going. So here's another example. You can see here we have a bearish fair value gap and a bullish one. However, the bearish one is much bigger than the bullish one. So that's going to be the one that I would pay attention to. So if we just extend this out a little bit, you can see that the price interacted with it after dipping down in the pre-market. Market opens, price comes up and goes into this bearish fair value gap. Get a nice dump here, right? And then price comes back up ultimately and interacts with it again up here before dumping again and coming back down. And on the way, there were a couple of smaller fair value gaps that were created in the meantime, right? So a fair value gap, again, is a place where price is likely to come back and interact before heading off into whatever direction it goes to. But they're very good as areas of interest. So the fair value gap indicator that we're going to create today, let's take a look at it. So I chose to use volume as the main driver behind this. I'm only going to show fair value gaps when volume is 2 times the average. And the reason why I did that is because if you uncheck this, you can see that it creates a few more gaps, and they tend to just be overlapping and add more noise to your chart. So we filter those out with volume. And how do I determine the average? I use a volume moving average length of 20. Then you have your gap length here. The gap length is currently set to 60, but you can change this to anything you want. You can see that you can make these come out and go a little bit longer. And the EMA is how I'm determining the trend here, and I'm using a 20 EMA, but of course you could change this to be anything. It could be a 50, it could be 100, and if you do change the average, the EMA length here, you'll notice that depending on what you do, you could get more or less gaps. I typically go with 20 to determine the trend. Then you have the minimum gap size to show. So here you can see I'm showing I'm on SPY, the S&P 500, and I'm only showing gaps that are at least 25 cents long, or wide, I should say. So if I change this and we go down to say 10 or something like that, you'll see other gaps come in, right? Smaller gaps. Now, sometimes these gaps might hold some value. Other times they may just be noise. Like this one here is really just kind of extra noise, and so is this one here. However, this one here is beautiful to trade off of. price just came right down and it made this beautiful candlestick off of this fair value gap, and then we had a nice run up here. But here they're acting as noise, so it's just a lot. So instead I chose 25 cents to be the main gap size. Then we have our sell fair value gap color, our buy fair value gap color, the text that goes inside here, the text color, and then the text size, which you can change here so you can read it better or whatever. But there you have it. That's how the indicator works, and now we can get started building it out. Okay, so once you open up TradingView, you're going to go down to the Pine editor, open it, and then you're going to say open and then indicator. When you do that, it should bring up a screen that looks like this, right? You're just going to have this boilerplate indicator code in here, which basically does nothing. So once you have that, we're ready to go. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up our inputs. Well, actually, the first thing we're going to do is name our indicator. So I'm going to call this the Fair Value Gap Finder. And we're going to make sure that it's set to overlay. Overlay equals true. Because if you don't set your indicator to overlay, and I've got Python on my head, if you don't set your script to overlay, what's going to happen is it will create an indicator below your main chart. So if I remove this and save, and then that's fine, then add to chart, you can see it creates an indicator down below the price, which is not what we want. So we're going to go ahead and close this, and we're going to make sure we set overlay to true. Okay, now, like I said, we're going to set up our inputs. So the first thing that we want to set up is a Boolean as to whether or not we're going to use the volume as our main method of determining where the fair value gaps are. So we'll say use volume equals, and then we'll say input. And the way PineScript works is when you create an input, you tag a variable to the input. So you say input.bool, for instance, or you could say .int or .float, whatever. In this case, it's going to be a Boolean, so we're going to say input.bool true, and then we can give it the sort of description or the name or whatever, and here we're going to say use volume to determine fair value gaps, and well, I guess that's it. And that's all we need to do for that. Now, if you save this and add it to the chart, already you can see that you have a checkbox here that is acting as a Boolean for you. Okay, so that's how we're going to set up our inputs. And of course, this right now, it's plotting the close, but we can remove that, hit save. You should see that plot go away. All right, good. Okay, so now we have the Boolean set for volume. We need to set how much volume do we want to use, right? So we're going to say volume threshold. I can say hold, volume threshold, and then say equals input dot int, and then we're going to say excuse me, 2, because we're going to be using 2 times the volume average. So volume average must be x times the average, or volume must be x times the average. More readable. And then we want to set up an option for stepping, right? So we'll say step equals 1. So what that means is, I'll save this. What that means is, I guess I have to put a plot in here. All right, save it. So what that means is we can mouse over this, and then we can set our step size. Every time that we press an arrow, it's going to step by this many steps. So now you know the basics of setting up an input and setting the step option. let's move on and add some more inputs. So now we're going to set the volume average length, and that's going to be equal to input.int, and we're going to say 20, and we'll call it the volume moving average. And of course, you can set a step for that to be whatever you want. Step for this, probably a good one would be 10. So we'll do step is 10 for that. Now we can set up our gap length. So the length that we want the gap to be in terms of like how far out do you want it to go. So here we'll say gap length equals input.int. And here we're going to say 60 for the default. And we'll just call it gap length. And again, we can set the step to be 10 here. And then under that, we're going to set our EMA length. So we'll say EMA length equals input.int. And for this, we're going to use a 20 for our EMA, for the length of our EMA. So EMA length. And for that, we can also set the step to, well, for that, we'll set the step to 1. Step equals 1. Okay, and now we want to set the actual size of the gap. So, or what the minimum size of the gap is going to be. So we'll say minimum gap size equals, and this is going to be a float. So we're going to say input.float. And remember, in the beginning of the video, I said that a good size was 25 cents. Again, you can set this to whatever you want. Minimum gap size to show. And then for this, we can set the step equals 0.01. All right. And now we're going to set our parameter for the volume, or what I should say is our condition for the volume. So we'll say volume condition equals, we'll say volume. And remember, we're going to be looking at, this is a 3-candle indicator, so we're going to be looking at the volume for the, not the candle that we're currently on, but the one right before it. So if you remember, if we open this up, if we're looking at the gap on this candle here, well, it's not really going to be a gap until we know what the low of this candle is going to be. So when we create this fair value gap, it's going to be during, or on the close really of the, or on the formation, I should say, of the third candle. So let's open this back up, and we have to say volume is 1. So we're looking at the previous candle's volume, and that has to be greater than TA, which stands for technical analysis, .SMA, which is a built-in method to get the simple moving average of the volume. And we need to say volume average length, which is what we determined, volume average length, which is the length of the average that we want to use. And we want to say it has to be greater than that times, and then whatever our volume threshold was. So volume threshold. And that's our volume condition. And I'm just going to make that lowercase. Okay, so now we have to set up our colors. So we're going to say, and we can say bullish FVG color, and we can say bearish FVG color. All right, so the bullish FVG color is going to be input.color. In here we type in color.new, which is color.new, which is going to be built-in method. And inside of this method, we put in the parameters. So this is a bullish FVG color, so we're going to say color.green, comma, and then we want to give it transparency value, and I like to use 70. Of course, you can change that to whatever you like. And then underneath that, we're going to say equals, oops, let's say equals here. I say input.color, color.new, and then we'll say red, or really color.red, and then 70 here as well. So now we have our bear and bull, or bull and bear colors for the actual FVG boxes that we're going to draw. Now we need the text that goes inside those boxes. We'll say bull FVG text and bear FVG text. And for the bull FVG text, we're going to say equals input.string, and we'll just say bullish fair value gap. And we just copy this, and down here we'll say equals input.string bearish. Oh, I just copied it, so I'll paste it, and we'll just change bullish to bearish. Okay, now we're going to set up the text color. So text, color equals, and again, we're just going to say input.color, and then here we can say color.new, and inside that we'll just give it whatever we want here. Now, if your TradingView theme is darker, you might want to set this to be white. I've got a white or a bright TradingView background or theme going, so I'm going to use color.black for the text, and for this I'm going to set the transparency to 10 so it shows up enough. So now we'll set up our size option. Say size option. This is going to take a little bit more work because when you're setting up, when you're allowing people to choose the size of the text, you're basically going to be using a size dot and then one of these options here: auto, huge, large, normal, small, or tiny. But you can't pass that as a text string and then have that become a variable. So what you have to do is you basically have to be a little tricky here. So we're going to say size option equals input.string, and then we're going to say title equals label size, and then comma. After label size, we choose options equal, and then we set up a list. And inside that list, we're going to say auto, and then we're going to say huge, and then we're going to say large, normal, small, and tiny. And then after the list, we're going to set the default value equals, and then we'll choose which one we want. And for the default value, I want small, and I put 2 equal signs here. Let me remove one. Now what we have to do is we have to set up a variable called label size. And what we want to do is we want to return a size dot and then one of these, right? Auto, huge, large, normal, small, or tiny. But we can't return this. We can't just, it would have been great if we could have just typed, size.auto, size.huge, size.large in these and return this, but we can't do that because PineScript won't turn that text into one of these built-in variables. So instead what we have to do is look at which option was chosen as the size option, and then return a variable based on whichever option they chose. So we'll say label size equals, and then we're going to say size option equals huge question mark, and we'll return size dot huge. Or if size option, and I got to put this in parentheses, or if size option equals large, question mark, then we return size dot large, right? So it's a little bit tedious. Or if size option equals, we'll say small, question mark, and then we'll return size dot small. Or if size option equals tiny, make that capitalization, question mark, then we'll return size dot tiny. And finally, we'll say if size option equals auto, then we return size dot auto, or we would just return size dot normal. And that will be how we actually do the label sizes. So let me save this. Okay, now we'll go up to the indicator, go to the settings, and you can see here where all the options are for the text size. And you can see all the other options as well. The volume must be X times larger than the average, the volume moving average, the gap length, the EMA length, the minimum gap size to show, the bullish color, the bearish color, the text for the bullish gap and the text for the bearish gap, the text color, and the text size. So now we can start initializing these variables and adding our logic. So we'll say EMA equals TA.EMA, and then we're going to say close, and then EMA length, and that will give us our EMA. Now we have to set up some variables for the volumes. So we'll say var by volume equals 0, and these are going to be floats. Var cell volume equals 0, and then we actually can initialize these. So we'll say by volume equals, or because it's already been initialized, so we have to say colon equals. That's how you reassign a variable in PineScript. We're going to say high 1 equals low 1. If that's true, it's 0. Else, we return volume 1 times clothes 1 minus low 1 divided by high 1 minus low 1. So that's how we get our by volume. Then our cell volume is going to be colon equal, and in here we're going to say high 1 equals low 1. If that's true, we return 0. Else, volume 1 times high 1 minus close 1 divided by high 1 minus low 1. And that's how we get our cell volume. So now that we have our volumes, we're going to say if use volume, and then inside of this, we're going to say if, and now this is where we test our volume condition. So we say if volume condition, and just by setting it by itself like that, it's you're saying if volume condition is true. It's basically the same thing as asking if it's true. We could say this, but I like to use a shorthand. So if the volume condition is true and the by volume is greater than the sell volume, and high 2 is, is less than the current low, because remember, we're comparing the high of this bar to the low of this bar, right? So if high of 2 bars ago is less than low, and the low minus high 2 is greater than our minimum gap size. Remember, we set up that that minimum gap size to be, I believe it was 25 cents. And the close is greater, the close 1 is greater than our EMA, then we are clear to draw a fair value gap box. So in here, we say box.new, and then we're going to say bar underscore index for the current bar. Then we have to set the parameters of our box. So the top, the right, the bottom, all that stuff. So I'm going to say high 2, and then bar underscore index, and then we're going to say plus the gap length here. So what did we use for gap? We used gap length, a variable called gap length. So plus gap length. And then we're going to say comma, low, and then border color equals, and here we're going to say color.new, color.black, and we're just going to set it to 100 transparent because we don't want to see it. And then here we're going to say background color equals, and then we can set this to our variable for bullish FVG color. And then we set the text equals to the bull FVG text, and the text color, text color will be equal to the text color variable that we set. The text size, and this is where we get to use our complicated code that we wrote for determining the size here. And then here we just say label size. And then we want to set the H align for the text. So text underscore H align. And that's going to be text dot align right. If we stop here, we'll probably see some fair value gaps on the chart. Okay, so we have some errors here. Let's go back through the code and take a look. One of the things that you can do is when you glance at the code, you look for these little red squigglies. And when you see those, you know that there's an issue there. And I can see just by looking at this that I put a parenthesis in the wrong place. Right here, there's another red squiggly right above the cursor. And that's because I forgot to put and here. And then I see another red squiggly here. And I think this should be text underscore size. So I'm going to save this and compile again. And there we go. Now you can see the fair value gaps showing up on the screen here. So it's looking as it should. So we'll go back into the Pine editor and we can create our bearish condition. So I'm just going to copy this, come down, paste, and we just need to change the conditions here. So obviously this should be, sell volume should be greater than buy volume here. And this should be low. And let's see, low 2 is greater than, or should be low 2 should be greater than high. And then this should be, or low 2 minus high. Low of 2 minus high is greater than the min gap size. And close 1 should be less than the EMA. And then we create our box, and the variables for the box should be, this is going to be low of 2. Bar index plus gap length is fine. This should be high. Border color is fine. This, of course, should be bearish. This should be bear FVG text. I think that's what we called it. Yes. Yes. Text color is fine. And that's all good. So now we have our bearish condition set up. So all we have to do now is just set up one final condition where we don't use volume. So else, and then we just paste right underneath that. Oops, let's get rid of that. And now we just remove our volume condition from these if statements. Save and compile. And let's take a look. So we'll go back, and there we go. We see our bullish and bearish fair value gaps. All right, so let's click on the settings and take a look and see if we can change some of the settings to, yep, good. And so when we don't use volume, you see these sort of extra boxes kind of show up, and we use the volume to filter those out. We can change the volume requirement. So, yep, good. If we change it to, say, 3, we should see less. Good. All right, so that's all looking good. Now let's change the gap length here. Let's go like 130. Okay, that's good. EMA length, we can change this to, say, 50. Okay, good. Yep. 100. It doesn't really matter. Go back to 20. Now let's change our minimum gap size. Let me go back to the most recent day here. All right, bring this back. Let's change this down to like 10 or something. All right, so this is good. Now we can see these the smaller gaps showing up, which is exactly what we'd expect if we change that to 10. I'm going to go back to 25 on that. Let's try changing the colors now. Okay, there's our bullish. Let's change the bearish colors. Good. And then we can change the text here. We'll say FVG. FVG. Good. Let's make sure it's changed everywhere, and it is. And then we can change the text size. Let's go to normal. There we go. So it looks like everything's working the way it should. And of course, we can go back in now and remove that last plot that we don't need. Save and compile one more time. And we are good to go. And that is how you build an indicator for TradingView. And I hope you got something out of that. We'll see you next time.